Hey everyone. After the last few weeks, I don't know about you all, but I probably was gonna rather hear about mussels. Um, I know that we all are in need of some good news in the world. I'm not sure I can totally provide that this evening, but I hope what I can provide is some information for everyone to take with them and to kind of arm themselves for making a difference, making a positive difference, for speaking with other people about this topic, and hopefully just getting more involved. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm planning on about 40 to 45 minutes of a presentation, and then we can have Q&A and a discussion. So, as Lara said, I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory. We're based in Arrow Rock, Missouri. We were founded in 2010. MRBO is an affiliate of Beyond Plastics and Break Free from Plastics, as well as the Plastic Pollution Coalition as well. Beyond Plastics is national and Break Free from Plastic is a global organization. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We heard just a touch about the brand audits, and that's sort of where that piece comes in. So I am a wildlife ecologist and ornithologist by training and trade. And so this is kind of how I got into this topic of plastic from that sort of angle, the bird and wildlife angle. I think we're all kind of getting used to seeing photos such as these. But there was a time that this was very, very surprising. This I would like to point out right here is a Lasian albatross. This is on a very, very remote Pacific island that is uninhabited. So we now know, of course, that our plastic trash goes everywhere. And when I started seeing, images of this nature, I really started thinking about like, where is all this coming from? Because it has become clear that this is not just, a problem here or there, but it's a very, very pervasive problem. So in about 2018, 2019, I started really getting educated on this issue and working with other organizations to try and understand what was going on and to try and look at it from both like a science-based analytical angle and also from sort of a systemic change angle. So you can see here, this is from August 2022. Sort of the outlook is getting worse. Again, this is the birds and wildlife angle of things, but I don't know about folks in this room, but I think if you're at a talk like this one, this is probably just as unacceptable to you as it is to me, right? Like this shouldn't be happening. So one of the first things that my organization did, MRBO, we started partnering with Missouri River Relief to do the brand audits that Laura talked about just now. And again, we'll give you guys some more detail on that a little bit later on, because it's certainly something that is a good thing to get involved with if you want to. But one of the things that really struck me when I started, doing some of the cleanup events with Missouri River Relief is just the sheer volume, the sheer amount of trash. And this is an organization, what are you guys, 25? Missouri River Relief is 25 plus years old, 24. And so you've been cleaning tons of trash out of the Missouri River for more than 2 decades, right? And there is just absolutely no end to it. And this might sound like sort of a bit of a naive observation, especially for people that join River Relief's cleanups on a regular basis. But it was just shocking to me that it just keeps coming and coming and coming. And no matter how many tons are cleaned up out of the river, like it just never stops. So this here is an image from the Ozark National Scenic Riverways down in the Missouri Ozarks. And so obviously this is not just a Missouri River problem. This is Naples, Italy. This is the Philippines. This is Paris, France. This is Poland. This is California. This is Knoxville, Tennessee. And this is Washington, D.C. So obviously, it is not just the problem of one geography or one watershed or a situation where you have, a certain amount of perpetrators that are in one place that can be identified and then the situation can be stopped. So from the land to the rivers to the sea, to paraphrase. About 80% of our plastic that ends up in the ocean is land-based originally, and it comes through channels like the Missouri River, of course. And we have approximately 88 million tons of plastic entering the ocean every year now. And I would just submit to folks to think about, as we sort of have this discussion, that we're always told that if we do this or if we do that, especially if we as consumers do the right thing, then plastic is okay. That we can control it, we can keep a handle on it, we can manage this waste. We've got this, right? I would submit that if we really knew how to manage the waste, we would not have 11 million tons of plastic entering the oceans every year. So some misconceptions are that it is, an ocean problem. I don't know that folks at River Relief think that, but I think that that's sort of like the pervasive belief, is that this is mostly something that people in coastal areas, and that is, ocean based. Pardon me, sorry, I'm not used to wearing one of these. That people purposefully littering and dumping illegally, especially into the ocean, are the main culprits contributing to this situation. We're also told all the time that all of this plastic that we have now is necessary, and that, of course, that's perfectly safe. And then get into kind of the big ones that I put in bold there. If everyone just recycled, right, this would all be okay. Y'all clearly aren't putting your proper ones and twos in the bins. So it's ultimately our fault as consumers that this is happening. And the other kind of big whopper, if you will, is that plastic is benign other than the litter problem. If we can just deal with that end of life litter problem, get a handle on that, everything else about it is fine. So let's talk about why that is not so, and why we're not getting a good handle on even that part of it. So realities are that this is a substance, an item that is polluting in every stage of its life cycle, and we'll talk briefly about each of those. It contains a lot of toxins. There's a lot of emerging radical research showing the toxicity of a lot of the components of plastic, and we're starting to kind of see some effects on human health. We just are simply not able to deal with the volume of plastic waste. That's become very apparent. And there's a lot of mis and disinformation out there that has to date made honest policy action very difficult, particularly here in the US. So please raise your hand, or you don't have to, but if you remember when the world didn't look like this, right? With every single thing in plastic, maybe more than one layer of plastic. We have everything in plastic now, right? So, did we ask for this? I think we should kind of look back on a little bit of history and see if this is something that people were like, hey, I really want more things wrapped in plastic. A lot of this started with, to put it briefly, we came out of World War II with a lot of very miracle materials. And instead of, ceasing or decreasing production, now that the war effort was over, industry said, hey, we've got this stuff. Like, we can totally still make it, and we can just sell it, and we can keep selling it, and we can make a profit, right? So this was heralded as this wonderful era of throwaway living. This is a cover from Life magazine in 1955, where people were celebrating the fact that they didn't have to do dishes anymore. They could just throw them away, or utensils or whatever. So this was looked at as a very desirable way of life, a desirable line of products that would make people's lives easier, more convenient. They wouldn't have to do so many chores, etc. Molding a bright future in plastics. So this is the actual cover of that Life issue. So we kind of had a shift where the production industry started looking to grow itself by moving plastic through people's homes. If we bought stuff and threw it away and then just went out and bought more, that's like basically an endless stream of profit, right? Instead of buying something one time and reusing it for however many years. So this is one of those things that seemed like a great idea at the time. easier, more convenient, was considered very sterile. Certainly not the things that we know now about the toxicity of the various components in plastic were not known or studied at that point. So it seemed like a good idea. So that good idea went from almost no global plastics production for consumer markets in the 1950s to, you can see it up there, we're at 2019 at the end of this chart. So it just grew exponentially over the last 70 or so years. So what we've ended up with is that we have this volume problem, and I'm going to throw some stats at you guys. In the United States, in 1970, the average person generated about 30 pounds a year of plastic waste, and it's now about 300 pounds a year per person on average. Globally, here's some information about production. In 1950, we globally were producing about 2.2 million tons a year, and we're now producing about 500 million tons a year. 1 million plastic beverage bottles produced every minute. So I think I've been talking for like 7 minutes. So 7 million plastic beverage bottles have been produced in that time frame. And that matches the amount of purchasing as well. So over 1 billion a day, 500 million plastic straws are used and thrown away around the world every day, and about 1 billion plastic bags every day. So when we then see things like this on our global landscape, and this happens to be Manila Bay in the Philippines, but it could be any of those other places I showed you and so many more, like we have this thing that we're producing in the quantities of hundreds of millions of tons every year, and it's not degradable, right? That's actually one of its desirable characteristics and why it came to be so embraced. But like, what did we think was going to happen other than this? Because it's not going anywhere and we're not doing anything with it. So just to call out plastic bottled water sales, and this is just in the US, 1996 to 2010, the curve continues upward, of course. We got to a point very quickly where we as consumers all thought that water in plastic bottles was better. It's better than what came out of our tap. It was better than what came out of our tap and was filtered through a reusable filter in our houses. So we've somehow like really embraced this use, this daily use of plastic bottled water. And that was not the case, like not all that long ago. So just to add the point here, we sort of have this like cultural paradigm that these companies produce this awesome water, and it's certainly marketed to us in that way, right? But they produce plastic bottles and then take water and that we have access to and put that in the bottle and sell it to us for more than gasoline. Am I moving around too much, Steve? I'm sorry. So one of the solutions that we've been hearing about since certainly like the mid 1980s is that we can recycle all this plastic that we've come to know and love and use and think is super convenient. The chasing arrows symbol that we all know well was designed in 1970, and it was designed, I don't know if you folks can read, I'll try and stop moving around, sorry. If you can read this part right here, but the bent arrows symbol has been chosen to appear on paper or paperboard packages made from recycled or recyclable materials. So it was meant to apply to paper and paperboard and cardboard. It was then borrowed by the plastics industry in 1988. And these are, of course, symbols that we all know, numbers that we know. The types of resins are listed here, and those are very broad categories. But the problem is that this is not accurate information. Like, it's just not accurate at all. I'm gonna go back to the previous slide. Raise your hand if your municipality takes 3s or 4s. Mine doesn't even take 5s. I live over in Marshall, Missouri. 6, polystyrene, that's what we know of as styrofoam. Like, have you ever seen polystyrene actually recycled? And then other is just a catch-all category that no one could describe that I've ever read. So the term wish cycling has been coined to toss questionable items in the recycling bin, hoping they can somehow be recycled. I'm totally guilty of this. I have finally unlearned doing this practice. But it's like, I really want to. I mean, I just said my community doesn't take fives. Things like yogurt are fives. Very, very common, consumer food items are in fives, but they're not being recycled. Greenpeace did a really nice study on the acceptance rate of 4 common plastics. So plastic cups, bags, cutlery, and plates, and they all have the chasing arrow symbol on them. So we think that they can be recycled. At least maybe they can be recycled somewhere. But there are almost no facilities in the United States that accept these items and accept these numbers through 7. And I would like to note that the United States has pretty decent recycling infrastructure compared to a lot of countries. So globally, these are just overall averages. And I would say that with new information that has just recently come out, that 9% recycled for all plastics globally of all time is probably a particularly like over optimistic estimate. But you can see here, we've got about 19% incineration. The majority of our plastic is landfilled and then mismanaged and uncollected. So it's leaching into the environment, basically. One thing that you might see, and that this went around social media a few years ago very extensively. And it was this fact along with this map. So these 10 rivers carry more than 90% of the plastic waste. Firstly, the number of 90% was never really well substantiated. But the main point of this information being out there was so folks would blame people in these countries, basically, instead of taking responsibility for it in their own home countries, which leads us briefly to where does your plastic go really? And if you want to check this out, there are a lot of very credible investigative journalist resources online that have articles on this topic. There are things like people putting air tags in bales of plastic that are meant to go to recycling facilities. There's a really good set of movies that came out of, I want to say like Denmark, but it's called Why Plastic? And one of the 3 of this trilogy of documentaries is an entire investigative journalism piece of like where our plastic actually goes. And unfortunately, and this is kind of like the reason behind why we wanted to blame people somewhere else for the plastic in the ocean, is that there are a lot of us developed nations that are sending our waste to other places. So you can, read some of the numbers for yourself and see where a lot of our waste as developed nations that are exporting is going. And this has resulted in the term waste colonialism, because basically we are just taking things we don't want and dumping them on places that can't say no. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the political and sort of like geopolitical negotiating ability to be able to just not accept all of this waste. So this all sounds really bad, right? So why do we allow this? Well, basically this is the answer to all the questions. Whether they're, what are they made from? Where do they go? Why can't we stop it? Etc. So plastics are made from fossil fuels and chemicals. There are many, many different kinds of many different thousands, if not tens of thousands of different resins of plastic, different mixtures. We'll talk about what's in a few of them. Right now, mostly, most of our plastics are being made from a byproduct of gas, which is ethane. So if folks have heard about the fracking boom, hydrofracking, right? One of the byproducts of that is ethane gas. And as we ramped up hydrofracking in the United States over the last 20 years or so, we had a lot of this byproduct. And it was like, what can we do with it? AKA, like, can we make this into something that we can sell and make a profit off of? So we have the oil and gas extraction. And this is, towards the beginning when I was like, this is something that pollutes throughout the entire stage of its lifeline, all the stages of its lifeline. This is what I meant by that. So starting with the extractive phase and going through the production phase, the packaging, and then the end of life that we're not managing very well. So this is sort of a really simplified diagram of what hydraulic fracking looks like. And you can see there that ethane gas is coming off as a byproduct. It used to be vented or burned, but now it is transformed by a process called molecular cracking into ethylene, which is a really nice building block for plastics, particularly single-use plastics. So we have a lot of material. We have a lot of input to go into products right now. So the thing that happens though is that this is the face of the plastic pollution crisis on our planet. And I think we all know this face very, very well. But this is also the face of the plastic pollution crisis. And so is this. And I don't think that we're as familiar with, those parts of the process. So it has become a topic of some alarm amongst conservationists, folks interested in environmental protection, people that in some cases we'll see want to breathe properly near where they live, are concerned because the frequency and the concentration of plastic production is only expected to go up. So here's a little idea of the emissions. And this is greenhouse gas emissions and volatile organic compounds. And you can see this is starting in 2015 when plastic production was already really very high. And the projection based on current industry projections of build outs. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're at a point certainly where we need to be concerned about the amount of greenhouse gas emissions and volatile organic compound emissions that we are putting out there to our planet, and plastic is not helping with that situation. So if plastic were a country, it would be the world's 5th largest GHG emitter. So about 32 million tons of CO2 are the equivalent in greenhouse gases every year. And here's a nice, I'm going to get out of the way for a second. Here's a nice graphic from the Center for International Environmental Law showing the equivalent in the amount of coal plants. So we know that we've been decommissioning coal plants here in the US for several decades. And right now, just to give you kind of a point of comparison, we have somewhere between 216 and 240 coal-fired power plants that are currently online in the United States. And so you can see that we're set to surpass that quite quickly just in terms of plastic production plants. So at a time when we're trying to take dirty energy offline, this is ramping up in the background. So another sort of facet to this issue is that the industry's pollution is not shared equally. I mean, I guess this probably comes as not much of a surprise to folks because there's pretty much no industry where the pollution is shared equally across demographics and across socioeconomic levels. Polluting facilities that degrade people's quality of life are typically not placed in areas where people are wealthy and have political power, right? So you can see we have a concentration of production facilities down here on the Gulf Coast, and then a little bit up into Appalachia and up into Illinois as well. So have folks here heard of Cancer Alley in Louisiana? Some folks, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, it's the 85-mile stretch of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, where there has been for decades an extreme concentration of petrochemical facilities. and associated very, very poor air quality. So documented cancer rates in this area are much, much higher. In some cases, with particular types of cancer, there are dozens of times higher than the national average or even other places in Louisiana. And this is a place that has been targeted for plastic production, petrochemical plastic production expansion. Because for lots of reasons, one of which I already spoke of, even though people there are organizing and fighting and doing whatever they can, they are considered not well off socioeconomically, and they don't hold political power in the state of Louisiana or even in their parishes. Another example of this is a recent construction in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, right along the banks of the Ohio River, right here. So this is this petrochemical facility, this plastic production facility, in its building stages in 2019. And even though 2019 is a while ago, I kept this New York Times article because I thought it described it really well. A giant factory rises to make a product that's filling up the world. And what this whole huge facility is for is to make these, which are nurdles, very small, the simplest building blocks of further plastic products, including our single-use plastics. So one of the things that several things here to be sort of contemplated are that, so this is in 2022, check this out, October 6th, 22, scheduled to come online soon, producing up to 1.6 million tons of plastic pellets per year. These little nurdles on the banks of the Ohio River, what could possibly go wrong? So we're processing ethane, component of natural gas, so from fracking. So what's really interesting is it benefited from Pennsylvania's largest state's tax subsidy ever, a $1.65 billion tax credit, plus various state and local tax breaks. It did bring jobs to the area, but many came from out of state, and ultimately it will employ 600 permanent workers. So possibly not ultimately in the long term the greatest trade-off. Not 6 months after it opened, it already exceeded its very, very lenient emissions permits, and was already hit. You can see May of 2023 hit with a $10 million penalty, which is an insignificant amount of money, right, to Dutch Shell running this. However, within 6 months, they exceeded their emissions permits. So there are also many incidences of flaring, again, exceeding permits, and these flares are putting out things like dioxins and benzene and volatile organic compounds into the air. Those nurdles that are being made there are these, all along this beach here. So do folks remember when there was that big fiery shipwreck off Sri Lanka, the Express Pearl? It was, I think, like May of like 21 or 22. So this big cargo ship sank. It released tens of millions of tons of nurdles off the coast of Sri Lanka. And this is what it looked like afterwards. And this is what the folks that were trying to clean up this beach, like, how do you even clean that up? I don't know. This is the kind of thing that they were finding. So this is the product that's being produced at that Shell plant. Thank you. Okay, so we're almost done with the bad news, I think, but it's not good. Since we're going smaller and smaller in size and we've gotten to nurdles, a little bit about microplastics. I bet folks in this room have probably heard quite a lot about this. There is a lot in the news about this issue, and that is largely because there's a lot of information coming out of medical research. So let's talk about that a little bit. So just to kind of be clear, what is a microplastic or a nanoplastic? And you can see the measurements here. And we have this substance, plastic, right, which doesn't totally biodegrade. And so what it does is breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, which now have names: microplastic, nanoplastic, etc. So here are just some examples: microfibers, which come off our clothes as well, which like none of us knew until recently. And then the smaller fragments that have come from, partially degraded products. So you can see down here, I added a couple terms that additional concerns other than like the physical presence of these smaller particles is that they can be like off-gassing and losing their chemical components, because I'll show a piece of molecular structure in a sec, but don't forget, these are fossil fuels and chemicals. And then many of them have a propensity to also sort of attract and bond with other substances in the environment, particularly in the marine environment. Okay, so not going to get super into this because organic chemistry was my worst topic in school, to be honest. However, why are plastics so resilient? It's because of these carbon-carbon bonds, and they can have multiple chemical additives. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with these terms, again, from news and information that has been coming out. PFAS, forever chemicals, have been in the news a ton lately. So they can be a component of these plastic products that we have. And then some of the other nasties and, I mentioned dioxins and benzene, et cetera. So of these so far, what has been studied are over, oh my gosh, you're right, it is very touchy. Over 10,000 chemicals have been found in our plastic products. And you can see here the hazard classifications. So none reported, these lack study. Some are of low concern, that's good. Some of these are of medium concern and some are high concern. And this is in the context of human health. So I think reason that people are becoming really, really alarmed is that we are finding these things everywhere, right? Everywhere. Mariana's Trench, up at the top of Mount Everest. You've probably seen the information about this. I thought this was a particularly sad one. The Adirondacks are relatively pristine, right? And this is the body of an insect that has all these different microplastics on it. We know now that microplastics are being uptaken from the soil into plants. And you can see some of the things that might be either in the microplastics already or uptaken by them before they are uptaken in the plants. So a growing area of concern is how this is going to affect agriculture. I'm really interested in seeing the research that is going to come out of the ag sector on this topic. This is getting to be old news now. This is 2022. Microplastics in our blood. Again, pretty old news. We have microplastics have been found in the placenta of unborn children. This is a little bit newer news. This was published in May of 2024, and this is microplastics in the brain. I just saw a presentation by Dr. Campen, who's the first author here on this paper, just like 2 or 3 nights ago. And they were actually finding, interestingly enough, more micro nanoplastics in the brain than in the liver or the kidney, which I thought was interesting because those are the organs that are, tasked with taking in the bad stuff that we give to them. So the problem beyond that, it's like, I think, gross and creepy that we have like little pieces of plastic in our bodies and our brains, is this, that a lot of these chemical constituents are carcinogenic and endocrine disrupting. So the Endocrine Society came out with this very big report a few years ago, which my local printer nicely put in plastic for me. But it's a several 100-page, incredibly well-documented report about the connections between plastics and endocrine disrupting chemicals in our health. So these are, these are things like our hormones that control basically everything from development all the way into every part of our lives. So this is the part that I think is causing folks to really become more aware of what is going on. It's gone well beyond, that beach looks yucky or the Missouri River looks yucky. Let's call Missouri River Relief and have them deal with it. Now we're in a situation where it could be directly harming people. So this is something that concerns me, is that it is also harming other species. There's, of course, far less research on wildlife physiology and health than there is human physiology and health. But what they are finding is that it's not very positive, and plastics, microplastics, and their components are affecting wildlife similarly to how they're affecting us detrimentally. So we have a problem that's so pervasive that researchers have coined the term plasticosis. That is so not cool. Like, we're causing a disease from our waste in other species, so now we've had to name it. I mean, that's pretty bad. So who benefits? Cui bono. Because clearly these are all really, really negative things. And I don't think anybody, if they knew all of these things, would be like, you know what? I really need my plastic cup anyway. Like, I think they'd go get a glass cup or a stainless steel cup, right? Like, if we had the choice as consumers and had all of this information about what's going on. So it's not us that's benefiting, right? Well, it's probably these guys. Plastics help us protect the environment by reducing waste, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and saving energy, allowing us to ship more product with less packaging material, which is immediately obviously untrue from anybody that's ever ordered from Amazon ever, right? But this is the American Chemistry Council. They're the lobbying arm for the plastics industry, petrochemical industry. And that's their deal. Plastics help us protect the environment. I don't know. The thing is that as far as the new production, the increases in production, particularly of single-use plastics, unfortunately, it's not just a matter of like paranoid conjecture. It has been stated, it has been celebrated in a PR and media friendly kind of way. Like, hey, we've got all of these building blocks for these products. We're going to make more. Isn't this great? Doesn't everybody want them? So as the world is talking about or trying to talk about or starting to talk about actually drawing down from fossil fuels for many of the things we use them for, we have an industry that is like, no, we really want our profits still, so we're going to switch to these other products, including plastic. A lot of this is in a report from May of 2015 by the American Chemistry Council that says that since we have so much ethane byproduct from this wonderful hydrofracking boom, we're going to use it to, make more money, create more jobs, and put more plastic out there. So this is, I don't honestly know that I've ever seen any estimate that like really differs from this, whether it's the UN, whether it's like the Economic Commission, whether it's a country, whether it's the industry. So we're right here-ish, right? And 66% of all time global plastics have been produced in the last, since 2000 to 2019. We're about here. The projection is here. So the thing to be aware of, I think, is this continued dialogue that if we just do X, it's totally going to be fine. The world can take all of this much more plastic as long as we do these things. It'll totally be fine. We'll clean up all the waste. Nothing, there won't be any health effects. It's fine. So you can see a lot of the things there. You probably recognize a lot of the terms there. These are industry-backed solutions without scientific basis without proof, basically, that they will work to deal with this avalanche of plastic that we have. Notice, notice that none of these are like, we're going to reduce production. That's never a thing. Even voluntary pledges typically go somewhere along the lines of, well, we'll use up to 50% recycled plastic in our products by the year 2040. So beware of this. I liked this picture that I took in Washington, D.C. a few months ago. This is not just a recycling bin, it's a dream machine, the promise of PepsiCo. I mean, come on, really? So there's an industry group called, there are many, but the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. You can look it up there. You'll recognize many corporate names on this list. I don't even know how many members it has, more than 100. But to much fanfare several years ago, they announced that they were going to invest 1.5 billion in cleanup projects. So things like what you guys do, which you should get some of your 1.5 billion, seriously. And folks that do beach cleanups, etc. But at the same time, this is what they were doing. And it wasn't a secret. Like, it's not like anybody had to dig deep for this information. They also were saying, we're going to invest this much in new plastic production plants. And of course, you know, the associated jobs and economic lift to the various areas, at least in the short term. So I don't think that there's any real solution other than turning off the tap, particularly on disposable single-use plastics. I mean, that's a great deal of what we're talking about here. We simply, it's just not possible. Like, we simply cannot keep creating things that are meant to be used for like 11 minutes as a plastic bag is and throw it away, and do that 100 billion times a year or whatever, and expect that like everything is going to be fine. So here are some ideas, and I know that it is a lot of bad news, but I take a lot of heart in knowing that there are a lot of people working on this topic and a lot of people that care about it. And it can even be, Bill says, it can even be bipartisan sometimes. So continuing education amongst our communities, things like this, I encourage you to talk to people about it. Shifting our culture from throwaway. I know that's a really like big challenge, but that's kind of where the problem started in the first place. And then of course, regulation, because typically folks that are making tons and tons of money off stuff don't stop just because you ask them to. So here's kind of the call to action, and I'll give a few examples of ways to get involved and people that have done this stuff. So be informed. I was thinking about this on the way here, and this is not a fun time to be an informed individual, really. But if ignorance is bliss, then it is also a good way to give away your power to make change. So I think it's really important that we all remain informed as much as we can. And just be sharing that with other people. Then there are a lot of opportunities for getting involved, literally like boots on the ground, doing community science work that is helping to collect data for various programs that are the science backbone of the things that we're trying to do on either a corporate or a legislative level. So I'm going to give a couple examples. Back to the very beginning. The brand audit. So this is, again, my organization and wonderful Missouri River Relief. I think we've done like 10 of these now. So basically what happens is we just get together after a cleanup and we tally up the brands that are found in this trash haul that Missouri River Relief brings back. It is fun, it's pretty dirty, it's enlightening as well, what you see out there. So I asked for these stats, and I think it was in 2023, y'all pulled about 24 tons of trash out of the Missouri River. And this year it's been about 19.4 tons. And barring really high weight items like refrigerators and tires and things like that, the rest of it is majority plastic, right? So this is it's it's a big haul in terms of tonnage. This is just to show you all a little bit of data. This is from Glasgow last fall. And you can see what we're doing here. We're tallying up items by their brand. At our brand audits here in Missouri, it's kind of interesting. PepsiCo is pretty much always our most frequent brand that we find, and Coca-Cola is second. That is not true in the global brand report. So what our data go to are the break free from plastic global brand audits. There are people doing this all over the world. There's hundreds and hundreds of plastic brand audits all over the world every single year. And the data that we collect here in Missouri is part of that, is contributed to that. So their number one, though, is always Coca-Cola. I think it's really interesting that ours is usually Pepsi. Don't really know why. So those data, and there are many such community science efforts that will submit data that eventually go to higher levels for use in things like negotiating legislation. I left this slide in here. I thought about it a lot, but these three on the right-hand side are federal level bills and then an EPA strategy. So these are great bills. This is to regulate those nurdles that we were looking at pictures of. And this is to basically pause construction of production facilities and other things and really look into the problem before we just permit more production facilities. So that's what those two are. This is the EPA has been going through a process of having a whole national strategy that the EPA is in charge of promulgating around plastic. Obviously, we don't know where this is going to go now, but I wanted to leave it in there anyway, largely because I wanted to show that there are actual legislators, actual representatives, and actual senators in Washington, D.C., and people at agencies that are thinking about these things too, and that care about them too, and that know about them. They certainly know more than I do about them, and are putting these into legislation and trying to get them passed. So it's not as though this is something that is never talked about in Washington, D.C. or elsewhere. This is in regards to the United Nations negotiation that are going on for an international plastics treaty that would stop things like waste exporting under hazardous waste rules for plastic. Unfortunately, even over the last couple years, the United States is considered a low ambition country in these international negotiations. We are kind of, along with just a couple other nations, we're kind of gumming up the works. But I don't think that's probably much surprise to anyone here when we think about how much influence the fossil fuel industry has over our government, right? But I did want to bring it up because it's historic, and something will get done, even if it's not as much as we want. It'll be a good international treaty. I will say that the petrochemical industry sent more than 2,000 lobbyists to each of these negotiations, which was more than all of the delegates and all of the advocates from all of the member countries combined. So they think it's important. Here are some examples of countries that already have, and this is just plastic bags. I didn't get into foam or any straws or whatever, anything else. But here are national level regulations to ban or limit. I mean, look at that around the world. This is not like some radical idea, right? There are a lot of countries that are doing this that are actually far ahead of the United States. So at this point, I'm thinking about working at our state level too, though, right? This is not just plastic bags. This is single-use plastic bans of any kind. So even Florida has to do with balloons. You're not allowed to release plastic balloons in Florida. Oregon just recently banned polystyrene foam. So there's a lot that can be done by us just here in this state. So I guess my last call to action, if you will, is if, oh no, it had to do it. PowerPoint had to do it. That says working together for change. I wanted to sort of announce that Stream Teams United and MRBO are working together under the Missouri Foundation for Health, a funding opportunity with them, with these partners on a 3-year project to really educate and advocate for good plastic policy in the state of Missouri. We just started and we are welcoming involvement. One of the things we're doing with Missouri River Relief is having a whole sort of education workshop here in Columbia to within the Beyond Plastics framework to really help people sort of learn to be advocates and train other people to be advocates. So we're kind of calling it like a train the trainer, train the organizer thing. And that's coming up, it's gonna be coming up in like February, March. So there's a lot of room for working together. And I feel like often things like this and some other topics are like really overwhelming. But we don't have to like each act like it's all on us as individuals, right? Like there are other people that are working on this and thinking about this, and you don't have to take it all. So that's, you know, sort of an invitation. I'm sure there will be stuff on Missouri River Relief's email, so you can keep informed about it. So I'm gonna stop there. And appreciate you guys.
Okay. Well, Dana, that's a lot. Thank you so much. And
There.
she makes this look so easy. And we've watched Dana dig into this stuff over the years. She's just giving you a little slice of what she knows, and it's a lot. But we have a couple people with microphones out here, Melanie and Elisa. Does anybody have questions? Because this girl has answers.
Dana, I just wanted to clarify. I always thought it was plastics was made out of petroleum and natural gas, but is that not correct?
There have been a lot of different iterations over the years. That is not incorrect. That is not incorrect. We're using so much what is often called natural gas now because we have a glut of it. Let me think about this. The original plastic was made out of which bakelite or bakelite, however people pronounce it differently. It was made out of formaldehyde and coal oil. So like it has evolved over the years.
Okay, because I remember reading a report some years ago, probably like 5-6 years ago, that said for every barrel of oil that was produced, over half of that barrel was used to make plastics. And then I looked for that report like a year later and I couldn't find it on the internet anymore. And I thought, was it incorrect or did somebody purposely take it down? You know, to hide it or what?
I haven't heard that exact statistic. I just know that like the types and percentages thereof of the various fossil fuels as components of as the building block of plastic has changed over years, and I'm sure and it's still going to be a little bit different with different products as well, but I don't think you're wrong. Like I just, you know, over time all kinds of different fossil fuels have been used. as
I-
plastic building blocks.
I just tell people it is literally oil and gas that you're wearing.
And chemicals, don't forget the chemicals.
Yeah, and chemicals to change it, yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to that is, every once in a while they talk about making plastics out of organic vegetable matter, and that's probably a small piece of the plastic production, but does it also have the same problems? I mean, plastic is plastic no matter what it's made out of, eh?
There's a lot out there on that, David. And I think while there are in our future potentially some plant-based products that science may may develop that might help with this. Currently, the things we know as like bioplastics still have a fossil fuel component. They still have that same like molecular structure that makes them really, really hard to break down. So if you've ever tried to degrade a compostable cup that looks and acts like plastic in your home composter and it doesn't work, that's why. They need a much higher temperature in an industrial compost situation. And at that point, it essentially acts as if you're incinerating it, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. So far, that road hasn't been very fruitful in terms of products.
Have you got any success stories of cities, states, countries who are doing well at dealing with plastic waste?
Yes. I don't, so actually I'm gonna. So I'm in no way saying that anyone has like completely banned everything and everything's perfect and they're living in like a plastic-free society. But a lot of these different countries are far, far ahead of where the United States is. In some cases, it is because fossil fuels, the petrochemical industry may not be nearly as important to their economy as it is to us, right? There's some other industry that's saying like, no, you can't ban our product, but it doesn't really like affect them politically if plastics are banned. So there's not as much pushback as there is here, if that makes any sense. But basically, everyone that you see there in blue and purple is a success story of some kind. I mean, they've at least taken steps to ban some disposable single-use plastic products that are unnecessary.
Of destroying plastic.
Define destroy.
Well, yeah, destroy, obliterate it. I mean, if you got a bunch of plastic here, can you burn it?
You can incinerate it. And that is what is done worldwide in about 20% of the volume of plastic. The problem is that the emissions are so great and so toxic, and plus you're left with some sort of like toxic ash product that then also needs to be cleaned up in some way, usually landfilled. So there are a lot of different methods, I guess I want to say, that people have tried, such as burning plastic for energy. I mean, it will create energy, right? It's fossil fuels. Like that's what we burn a lot of for energy. So that will happen, but you're left with really bad air emissions, and you're always left with a product. It doesn't biodegrade, and that product is very toxic as well. So kind of, yes, like you've destroyed the product, but you're left with other byproducts that are really not positive.
So my question concerns how we ship out the plastic to the islands, or, and you had mentioned because they don't have the political power or the wherewithal to say no. So I'm just wondering, do people pay them? I mean, are we offering some type of incentive for them to take our plastic?
That's a great question in this super complicated situation that I'm not going to sit here and be like, I know all the ins and outs of like the waste import and export business. In some ways, it's a commodity like any other commodity that has a market for it, right? Or not a market for it. So the reason that we're able to recycle, and the recycling rate of like 1s and 2s, the ones that we all know of as the most recyclable because they're the most accepted. And they are, I don't want to speak in any absolutes. They're the easiest to recycle, except for the ones that are black or that have film or that have multiple layers. Like there's always exceptions, but we'll just stick with 1s and 2s. There's more of a market for those than any other type of plastic. Partially, that's why we built up the infrastructure that is better, right, for those. So a recycling facility will sell bales of those to a buyer, to, in some cases, a middleman. In some cases, it is, a manufacturer that will take it and recycle. A problem that we ran into in, I believe it was 2018, we were shipping a ton of our plastic in general, but again, 1s and 2s, a lot to China. A lot of our waste was going over to China. Well, because of, and I will say too, that my understanding is that once it was there, it wasn't going through nice, clean, environmentally friendly recycling processes the way that we would all think of that happening. It was things like, incineration, burning to melt, no air filters on the processes, etc. But they were taking it, so we were happy. In 2018, China was like, nope, like we're done, basically. So my understanding is that part of it was contamination, just like other products in with the 1s and 2s, dirty, like still like foodstuffs. They were just like, we can't handle this anymore either, basically. And that sent the whole recycled material commodities market into just like a complete uproar. And so there were and are warehouses full of plastic that kind of have nowhere to go. So there's a lot of like actually really, really fascinating information out there about how that whole market works. And like, again, there's been like investigative journalism where people are tagging things, and it's like, are they going where, you really think they're going to go? And it turns out that they're going somewhere completely different. But how the market, even there's like even like a black market component, and it's just like really interesting.
So we do have a few questions online that kind of follow the same train. So one person is asking, there's kind of a string of questions here, but does it still even make sense to recycle number 3 through 7 plastics now? Would we rather have them in the landfill than shipping them out to other nations? And there's some kind of follow-up questions too that maybe I should hold on to for a second. But along those same lines, there was another question from Karen Zimmerman, which is, what is the percentage of items sent to recycle that actually get recycled? And, here in Columbia, a few years ago, they were like, give us your 1 through 7s. We'll figure it out, which was a disaster, but like, they never even really pretended that they were going to recycle 3 through 7. They were just like, it'll just be easier. Just give it all to us,
Yeah.
But
Yep. One answer. So 1s and 2s latest data are in the United States, about 28 to 29% are recycled. But that is an overall number that's recycled to purchased. It is not like I'm not even like exactly answering Karen's question, right? Like it's not like how much did we try to recycle versus like how much was recycled. So some of that would be lost to people just throwing stuff away. Recycling of 5s, I think, are on the order of like maybe 5-6%, maybe, and the rest of it is basically zero. Basically zero. So in answer to the other person's question, unfortunately, right now, given the infrastructure that we have and the, global waste colonialism issue, coupled with sort of like the leakage from places, like even when we think we're sending things to the right place, we're not. Unfortunately, the consensus right now amongst the plastic community is that it is better just to put them in landfill. Because at least I hate saying that, but like at least here in the United States, we do have a regulated landfill system that is maintained to a good infrastructure standard. And when we start shipping stuff out, we don't necessarily know that's the case. I mean, we're almost certainly never going to be shipping stuff to a country that has a well-maintained regulated landfill system, like just by the very nature of it. And so I'm sorry to answer that question that way, but yeah.
I mean, we're all kind of asking each other these questions. It's a conversation, and the answer is always going to be changing. But yeah, it's like a disturbing trade-off.
Do we have time for another one over here?
Is it the case, I wonder, that our use and abuse of plastic is not sustainable? In other words, we have to make radical changes in our lifestyles. I mean, imagine if all the plastic dropped away here, I would be without some clothes for a start. Our cars would all melt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I mean, do some people believe that it is sustainable, our use of plastic, and the increased use of plastic is sustainable for the future? What's it going to be like in the end of the century, for example, in our use of plastic? So are the visions of a world without plastic? I mean, like visions of a world without carbon fuels? The only thing I can think of that come to my mind at the moment is that there's some people who try and run food stores with no plastic. And I also remember when I was a kid, we'd go to the grocery store and there was no plastic. The guy would get a scoop and dig out of a sack and put it in a paper bag. So we did live without plastic in my lifetime.
Right.
I mean, do we need a vision? Do we need to be thinking in the long term about how on earth, what we're going to do with our use of plastic?
Yes. Yes. I think so. Yeah. Was that a question? Because I just say yes. I think that exactly. So I think right now, I don't know, honestly, anyone in any sort of like conservation circle that thinks that we're going to get to a world of zero plastic, of zero, because what you just said, right? Our cars would melt, et cetera. There are some very, very legitimate life-saving medical uses for plastic. A priority is a vision where we don't have all of these disposables. And it almost is like returning to how it was, which it seems to be an attractive notion for a lot of people in various ways, right? This like sort of nostalgia for the past. So it makes me sort of hopeful that that sort of community and like, and what's the word, like atmosphere of shopping that you just described, where you'd go in and you'd get a scoop of this and the butcher would wrap stuff in actual paper and all of these things, would potentially be an attractive vision for a lot of people. I think that's possible. It has been done. Right. I mean, one of the practical considerations of that is I keep using the word infrastructure, I'm sorry, but building out the infrastructure for that, right? Like right now, the stores that we're talking about that do that are sometimes, not always, but sometimes quite expensive. And, you know, you spoke earlier tonight, that it's something like right now, living with as little plastic as possible is something that takes a lot of time and effort, like a lot, right? It's gotten to that point. I mean, if you eat food, like I don't even honestly, like I don't know how you get away from it at this point, right? So it
I do not buy anything in plastic. When I grocery shop, I don't buy anything that's packaged in plastic. And it's really healthier.
that is
So if the grapes are in a plastic bag, the ones with a little bit of holes, I haven't had grapes in, well, I had them recently because they were in bulk. If it's not in bulk, I don't buy it. I buy my meat at the, what do you call it? Not the deli, but thank you. I buy it there and they wrap it in paper. And when I'm a retired truck driver, so I know about plastic because I've seen my loads wrapped in tons of plastic. Okay, you have your soda bottles, which are in soda bottles that are plastic, and they're in a case that's wrapped in plastic, and then the whole pallet is wrapped in plastic. I mean, please.
Right.
And that's all single use.
right.
That's all single use. But I don't, if I would shop on the road, because I cooked on my truck, and if I went to a store or I called them ahead of time, I said, do you have a meat counter that would wrap in paper? And they'd be like, no, we only use plastic. I'd be like, okay, well, I'm not going there. And I didn't. And that's how I've been doing. But I started out slow as I learned about stuff, and I've gradually done that. And now I'm deplasticizing my house. I'm getting rid of anything that's plastic that I can.
So I think the things that you described in the loads that you were hauling, the plastic bottles that are in cases that are wrapped in plastic, that are on pallets that are wrapped in plastic, like to me, that's pretty low hanging fruit as far as making changes. It does not need to be that way, right? It doesn't. And that might take somebody telling Coca-Cola or whomever that they have to stop. So there's a lot of different actions, solutions, pathways that we can all take. And one of them is like individual action in your own life. And then there's things like telling the stores, hey, I mean, I know a lot of people that have gone to store managers at their local stores and said, man, I'd buy more stuff here if you didn't package it the way that you do, So kind of consumer pressure. Then there's like the legislative and regulatory end of things. And then there's what this gentleman talked about is like thinking on a higher level of like a collective vision. And that is more of a, I don't know, like grassroots paradigm shift, basically. You can't regulate that. It has to be something that, and this has all changed in like 50, 60 years. Like, we're not talking about something that we've been reliant upon for the last 400 or whatever, or that nobody alive like remembers when it wasn't like this, you know? I mean, this is a really, really fast change. So, I mean, in theory, it could be a pretty fast change back to, you know, maybe not like, oh, we're never going to use like plastic-based pacemakers, but are we going to have bottles of soda always in plastic, which doesn't taste as good anyway, wrapped in plastic on pallets? Like, I could totally see that happening pretty fast.
But I think we have to have a revolution, because we live in a supply and demand society, capitalism worldwide. And so if a product doesn't sell well, they will cease production of it. As long as there's a profit to be made, they're going to keep on making it. They don't care how bad it is for the rest of the world. They don't care how bad it is for future generations, because what they're making right now is what they care about. And that whole thing about, well, it brings jobs. Baloney. That's a lie. It may bring jobs there, but there's other places that aren't. I usually delivered at warehouses that are going to full automation. There was 2 people in this huge warehouse, and they were directing all the automated forklifts, putting it on there, not people driving forklifts. So those jobs were lost.
I think that I totally agree 100% with the concept of like voting with our wallet, as people say.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that there are a lot of people that just looking at like today's reality with like what food is cheaper, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't make that choice. They, you know, and there's a lot of people that just simply do not have the information about it to make that choice.
Education is so important.
It is, exactly. So I think that in the meantime, I still feel like we need to pursue like multiple solutions at once.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, we need to stop this whole like, let's make 500 million tons a year thing, while people learn more about it, care more about it, and have choices available. Like, we can't just be like, okay, like no food is wrapped in plastic anymore. So, but it's going to be twice as expensive, because that is, you know, the world that we're currently living in many ways.
Which doesn't make sense.
And we can't, it doesn't, but that capitalism thing, you know? So we can't like leave people behind and have them not be able to like buy food, you know? It's not a solution. So I think all of the things at one time, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm.
And what each individual of us can do as well. I'm also wary of just having the solution be personal individual consumer choice, because that's where we're at right now. That's what we're told is the solution. Like, if you just do this, and if you're not doing that, like, you're totally part of the problem, and you know that you're the reason it's not changing. Well, there's a lot of choices being made by industry that we're not being consulted about. We're just the end user, right? So I don't think it's fair to people, and I think ultimately it feels and probably is quite futile to try and change all of the things by like what you buy in your life. Not saying don't reduce plastic, but it's not the full answer.
kind of speaking to that, I too remember when things were mostly in glass or were canned at home or came in fact, I moved to Columbia in 75 to join a food co-op that did everything in bulk. But we failed in the market because outsourced costs of packaged materials could be subsidized and spread across the whole of the general grocery market. Most people are not informed consumers, and doing it on an individual level. But beyond that, I mean, I think we should still do that. I have seen in the last 6 months bulk foodstuffs dwindling in Colombia. I mean, the access to it is no longer where it was 6 months ago because people do not pursue it. But some of the things that have a commonality with this problem and other problems in our society is our lack of opportunities to discuss these things with each other on a regular basis. I mean, I remember when we started the food co-op, we had monthly meetings about the food co-op and about that problem. We had monthly meetings about other things amongst people like this. I look around and we're a grain generation. Talk about people who remember that. And it's a problem of only 50 years ago, but I'm 72. There's 3 generations of people who have that experience not at all, have no recollection of it, don't see it in media. We have to talk to each other about it more. I mean, people are going to have salons and gatherings and focused social groups where we potluck and talk about how we're going to address these issues, or we're going to be isolated in our rooms bemoaning the fact that it's all slipping away. I mean, here we are talking, and we all want to say something. And we all got ideas. We're all going to repeat each other's ideas. They outsource the costs to our grandchildren's generation. And the cost is healthcare because of the poisoning, because of the pollution, because of the sterility of the soil, because of the decimation of the diversity of life on the planet, and they're going to do it for short-term profits unless we, get out of bemoaning things and start getting together and strategizing what we're going to do.
David, do you not think that everybody fighting on social media isn't working?
Well, sorry, go ahead. Okay. I was just going to suggest that we close this conversation for the evening and continue the conversation in our lives with each other and with our friends that aren't here. Those ripple effects, as Dana was talking about, is the hope that we have to have, but we have to do it. So each one of us that's here, each one of us that's watching, thank you so much, Dana, for sharing this with us tonight.